Chapter 3 The Village of Alden. The journey was long and arduous for the former Knight of Aperture, yet he pressed on. Through the night and across the wild, Sir Wheatley carried the Lady Chell, until at last he saw in the distance the village of Alden. The sun was just beginning to rise as Sir Wheatley strode across the vast wheat fields that surrounded the small town. As he approached the edge of the village, he was greeted by a young girl called Ellie. Upon seeing the Lady Chell's wound, Ellie grew frightened and ran away from the two strangers. Wheatley followed her into the village, and soon the good people of Alden brought him to the town's healer, a woman by the name of Dylan. Chell's wounds were dressed, and Sir Wheatley was comforted that she would be made whole once again. And so she slept until the sun was low in the sky and night was coming on. The Lady Chell awoke, and by the art of the healer of Alden, she was well enough to walk again. Upon waking, Sir Wheatley told her the tale of how he had carried her back to the village, but Chell was not as overjoyed as he was. She told him that he was forgiven for his actions with the crown, and for almost abandoning her at the secret door, but a third trespass would be the last she would permit. Sir Wheatley had so few memories of his life before coming under the control of the Queen that he was unsure of the common courtesies of most folk. Indeed, he was disposed to follow Lady Chell wherever she went. Chell's cottage had a spare room for travellers, and it was there that Sir Wheatley stayed. Thus did night fall on Alden, and the Lady Chell and Sir Wheatley rested peacefully, hopeful that they had both at last been freed from the wrath of Queen GLaDOS. Chapter 4 The Market. That night, as Sir Wheatley slept, he had a very strange dream. The context was a mystery to him, yet he seemed to think it might have something to do with his forgotten days in Aperture. In his dream, he was running through the castle to deliver a message, when suddenly he ran straight into a servant girl carrying a very tall stack of plates. In dismay, and amidst the sincerest of apologies, he stooped to help gather the shattered fragments, and it was then that he looked up and beheld the young woman he had so clumsily hindered. Never had he seen such beauty in all his life. He opened his mouth to speak, only to be suddenly awoken, and alas, the dream was gone. As soon as he met the Lady Chell that morning, he realized with amazement that it had been her face that he had seen in his dream. As they both walked through the town on their way to the market, Wheatley told Chell of his vision, though he did not disclose his admiration of her beauty. He spoke of how, though it seemed to be a memory, the details were dim and bizarre. His account intrigued her, for their memories of the events that had taken place before the meeting amidst the trial of the bow were mysteriously lost to them both. When they reached the marketplace, the Lady Chell introduced Sir Wheatley to the good people of the town. His identity as a Knight of Aperture was kept hidden, lest the people be afraid of him. Though despite their effort to conceal his true occupation, it was apparent to most that he was not quite what he seemed. One of the Lady Chell's dear friends, the town's chief elder, Aaron of Halifax, pressed them both for an answer to how she had become so badly wounded. Fearful of her dear friend becoming too inquisitive about the old castle, she bid Wheatley relay the tale of the dark evils that resided within its walls. For though she was growing fond of him, Chell knew Sir Wheatley was a coward, and that the fear that burned in his voice as he spoke of that evil place would be enough to lead Aaron to decide not to press the issue further. As his tale ended, Sir Wheatley was quite shaken. Simply recalling the terrible place they had come from terrified him, yet the Lady Chell casually surmised that his obvious fear had succeeded in convincing Aaron never to inquire of the castle again. Sir Wheatley then realized the Lady Chell's purpose in bidding him to relay the terrible account. He grew angry at her for selfishly using his fear for her own purposes, and thus, in a fit of anger, he declared to her that she was no different in heart than the very queen they had escaped from. Chell was so offended at this that she struck Sir Wheatley across the face in anger. It was then that they both realized they had hurt each other, yet it was Wheatley who fled in shame. Chapter 5. The Woman in the Tower. Sir Wheatley ran until he reached the farthest edge of the village, where the watchtower of the old kingdom still stood. The old and decaying stone of the former outpost rose before him as he approached it. In his wandering he came upon the town blacksmith, Garrett, son of Richard, standing at the foot of the great structure. Garrett was a young yet hardy fellow, with blond hair and skin that had seen many a day in the sun. The blacksmith hammered a piece of iron upon his anvil, and when Wheatley approached, he looked up and greeted him. Upon their acquaintanceship, Garrett told Wheatley the tale of the outpost and of his work therein. In the days of the kingdom when the Alet were first brought to the outposts, an apparatus of mirrors and crystals had been built in the highest level of each tower. There the Alet of the outpost would stand in the midst, and the light reflected from the machinery around them increased the distance of their communication with their fellow Alet in nearby towers. During the war, this particular tower had been a point of attack, and the apparatus of mirrors and gems had been damaged. Garrett, being skilled in metalwork and all things mechanical, took up the task of repairing it. He was near completion, yet there was one element he lacked: the Alet of the tower. The Alet of this outpost was a young woman, wondrous fair to look upon, with long white hair that reached nearly to her feet. After the knight of the outpost abandoned his tower, the people of the village had freed her. Yet when her bonds were broken, she grew afraid and asked for the servant of the king to command her. The people told her that he had left, and that she was free to go wherever she willed. But the Alet, having been enslaved for so long, was fearful and unsure of any other life beyond the outpost. She hid herself inside the tower, and would not leave unless a servant of the king should return. Garrett had tried to speak to her as well, but she refused, and would hide whenever he approached. He had grown very fond of her, and brought her food and water in her solitude, yet still she refused to speak to him. He had named her Foxglove, for she reminded him of the flowers that grew in the fields outside of Aden. Yet for all his hard work on the tower's machinery, if Foxglove would not aid him in its operation, then all his work would be for naught. As Garrett told Wheatley of his work on the tower, the Lady Chell approached. Sir Wheatley met her, and they both sought each other's forgiveness. They returned to Chell's cottage, all wrongs for that day made right.